Hi, I'm Mr. Miyagi, and this is Mr. Miyagi's Workshop. Well, it's Monday, and we're back on that 1973 CB350. Right here I have the head and the vise, and we're going to get to putting it back together again. So let's get to it. Now, I've already installed the right side valves and such, and you know, this is the card I showed you that I had before made up to hold the valves, and then of course I bagged everything up. So we're going to insert the exhaust valve, and one of the things I like to do is I like to put a little grease on there, a little lubricant. And you ask why? Well, I'm not sure how long this motor is going to sit before we fire it up, so I always like to coat those surfaces that are going to be touching. And another thing I like to do is I like to put a little bit on the stem itself, and we'll put it up in there. And then I like to coat the area where they have the keepers at. We'll recoat it again just to make sure everything's working right. So then we'll insert that, push that in there. Now I want to grab, I had it marked on here, left exhaust, so we're going to go that way with it. One of the other things you want to keep in mind when you're putting these together is that you can see that these springs have a tighter coil at the bottom, and that's the way they go in, just like that. So I'm going to insert this on the other side here. What I'm going to do is grab my tool. All right, so when I'm screwing this in, I'm actually hitting the center of the valve, so I can compress this spring and everything together. So I'm going to put the keepers on. That one's on. One of the reasons why you want to put a little grease on those stems, and then I'll add a little bit more to the keeper. It helps hold everything in place while you're putting this together. And rotate that around just a little bit. So now that we've got those stuck on the stem, we can very slowly release the pressure on that so that they'll seat into that valve cover cap that holds the keeper. And another thing I like to do is I like to take a little pop with a hammer, and that just helps seats everything. So we're going to do the same thing on intake. We're going to place a little bit of grease on there. Just get it nice and coated. Once again, we want to put some on the stem. So when we shove this in, it'll coat that shaft, that valve guide. There we go. That shoves it in place. Put a little bit more on there. Grab our other set, and then we just compress it so that you can get those little keepers on. So now we're going to take our keepers and put those on. You just try to get them up on there. And it's nice with that heavy grease. It'll hold everything in. You just want to make sure that that taper fits properly. So you got to kind of be careful here because you can knock these things loose. That's why you use a little bit of grease on there. All right, so that slides up on there like oop. Slides up on there. Gets put in. This one here has fallen out a little bit. So it's where the little magnets come in handy. And now I messed up the other one. The whole process on that is not to get in a hurry. There we go. So that should, when I back off, everything should go into that taper should go into that tapered part on the valve cap there. And there we go. Once again, a little bit of a tap. Okay, another thing that I want to point out too, when I took this head apart, there was little rubber inserts that went in between the fins. They slide right down in there. One goes there, and another one goes right in there. My best guess is that these were vibrational to keep these heads, the fins on the head, from vibrating too much and cracking. That's the only thing that I can think of why they would do that. Now, a lot of other heads and stuff I've worked on different bikes, they don't have that. So we just shove those down in there. I'm going to put these. They were a little bit difficult to get out. I ended up using a screwdriver to kind of pry them out, but it worked. And all that is just a piece of flat metal. I use it in the vise when I'm trying to round stuff out on flat stock. So those are all back in there, looking pretty good. So I'll show you what I've got here. This is just a simple little valve spring compressor. Pops apart. Comes with a fair amount of attachments and such for it. I got this, I think from Mike's XS years ago, because I have some other styles, but this works the best because it comes with different sizes. Now you can get this on Amazon or Common Motors-com that handles a lot of the, the Honda stuff, or Mike's XS. And they run about 30 bucks. And it's worthwhile tool to have. Oh, I guess we're at the stage to put the crank in. So what I've done is I lubricated those bearings, outer bearings, with assembly lube. Okay, now we got it. Dropping this down in there. So we have some raise points here on this one for the main shaft. It goes right into there. And on these center shafts, they line up opposite of each other. That goes down in there. So this goes on that side, and that one goes down in there. So this main bearing's locked into place. And these two other bearings, let me get a little better view here. So what I'm talking about is that these have little pins that come out, and they go down in these grooves on either side. So that's how you know that you got everything kind of lined up in place. And like I said, on these outer bearings, I actually use some of this lube to make it roll a little better. Okay, now you remember I put 3 little dots there that line up with these 3 little dots. And so now the center can be installed. Okay, I'm torquing these to 17 pounds, and I'm doing it in a crisscross pattern. And I'm checking to see if there's any tightness, and it turns over quite nicely. So when you're using your torque wrench, always back it off so that it stays accurate. Now we're going to focus on putting the transmission parts in. I've got to get everything, so I'll be right back. All right, so let's get to putting the shifting drum in. So one thing, like I said, I like to do is I like to lubricate up this stuff with assembly lube. And we're going to slip this in and out a couple of times. Get that all kind of lubricated up there. Maybe a little on outer shaft. There we go. All right. What we want to do is we want to grab main shifter paw here. Slide that on. So then we grab the center, which is the smaller fork. And the pin on that one goes on this side. Now we grab the last fork, and that pin goes on the outside too. So this all kind of just shoves together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting in pins. So it's fairly easy. You just have to drop them in. Got to work them so they go past into its groove. There it goes. And then these clips get put in. All right, that just shoves in. I'm going to grab a pair of pliers. These just slide in there until they lock. There, that's locked in place. Now we'll grab the next one. And that slides in there. I think pin in place. Try not to drop it anywhere else but where it needs to go. These around. And that locks in. So, last one goes right there. And I think I'll do like another one there. Now we drop the pin in, line that up over on the slot. That drops down in there. Let's get this out of the way. Take this clip, just push that through the hole. There we go. Now I did one time on a 360 put that clip on the wrong side and had it in wrong, and that pin fell out, and then it kind of messed up some gears, which wasn't a good idea. So what I ended up doing is I put that neutral lockout in place and slid this all together, and it kind of goes together. Let me drag it out here a little bit. So you got to kind of shove all this stuff together at the same time, because that spring, this little catch here, catches on to this little notch there, and then this bigger part fits against the casting right there, and then you got to have that little spacer in there. Several things at once. So I usually just kind of get that spring located somewhat. This goes, slides in there like that. And goes down around everything. There we go, that's held in place. And then we have our locking bolt. All right. And what this does is when it goes into gear, there's a little round spot that fits into these little grooves, and everything is kind of held in place. So I'm going to torque that down and then move on to the rest of it. Okay, when you're putting these gears in, you want to make sure that you put these half rings in place. There's one located right here, and then there's one located off the main output drive. We're going to put this in place. Oop, goes the other way. And this little bearing here has a little tab up that you got to lock that all on. We'll drop that down in there. Line up with a little slot on the gear. There, things dropped in. Okay, so now we'll grab final drive cluster. Same thing's going on here. We have a half ring and a little notch that comes up. So get this all kind of set so they fall in place, hopefully. There we go. That drops in there. All right. That's all in place there. We got a couple things we need to do. Is we need to put some seals in off for the main drive out and for the push rod tube. So I've got to get those seals together and we'll get that laid out. Here again, I'm going to lubricate these fork areas. One thing I like to do is I like to put just a tad bit of sealant on these seals when I set them in. It's much easier to put them in now than it is later. And I also, when I put this one in, I lubricated that shaft just a little bit. All right, I went through the gears and checked everything. Everything seemed to be working fine. I found out on this drum it's easier just to use a Phillips screwdriver on the bottom down there, and you can shift everything into the proper gear. So now what we need to do is we want to make sure that this case is good and clean, and then I'm going to bring the bottom half over and we'll mate them up. I applied a little bit of sealant around here. I put a little extra knob on where the seals are at and kind of went around the whole case here. Now you can use basically whatever you want for sealant, or you can use some Honda Lube products. They work just as good too. So now I'm going to set this on and see if it fits. All right, that's down. Now I got to get my screws. We need to install the shifter pod piece. Well, it just kind of slides down. This moves down. That all locks into place. Really simple. Now I've put the bottom stand on already. I've torqued all of the bolts down. All right, now I'm kind of setting up the timing chain here. You want to make sure that when you put this together, I didn't film this part, but this piece slides in, and then we have, don't drop those, on this center pivot area, there's a little notch right there that center shaft goes in, and then the actual shaft that holds everything in place slides in, so you can, everything rotates on it. That drops down in the hole. And you don't want to forget these little buggers. This is what holds that shaft centered, and there are little rubbers that go in there. They just push in. So those just sit on either side there. And that stabilizes the shaft, the pivot shaft, for all this to run on. This is where your timing tensioner touches against. So that's the rear. All right, so we got a cylinder here, piston cylinder. Now I've honed this cylinder just a little bit so that would break the glaze. But one thing you want to make sure that you do is there's some O-rings that need to go around this base here. So they just slip down in there. You want to make sure these are in place. Just keeps it from leaking oil. And I also put in the guide dowels because they'll hook, those dowels will go right into the block, right up there, the upper part of the block, after you set the cylinder on. So one of the other things you need to put in is your front kind of guide, and that just slips in, drops in, and then once you're on this side here, you can put your pin back into place. Try to get it equal as possible on each side. Drop into these little spots right here. So I'm going to get ready and set up the pistons. I've already done the one piston, the left-hand piston. I already put the new rings on. So this is the left-hand side piston, and I'm going to lubricate the shaft. Right, I need to put my pin in. There we go. All right, it's locked in, so the keeper's locked in there pretty good. So I also have this little piston stop here. Now I just made that out of a piece of aluminum. Some material that I had laying around here in the shop. So that holds that piston in place. So we'll move it over to the other side. It also helps when you're putting the cylinder on. Okay, we're going to put this right side one on. Here again, I'm going to lubricate this stuff. Put a little wrist pin down in there. I've set my piston rings at 120. And of course, you always want to look at, when you get them, there'll be a little mark on them, and that's the mark that goes up. All right, I feel it. Push it in. Now I need my little snap ring. Easiest way to do that is to put in this piston stop. And then we'll just rotate that in there. That's good. So now, piston's on. You can spray it down with a little bit of WD. Now, other guys use a lot of oil and everything on it. I like the WD pistons and such for breaking in. Coat this a little bit. And then I'll coat the inside of the cylinder. Get it locked on. Now, one thing you want to kind of do at this time is to get all this timing chain and everything up into place. Now, what I've done here is I've got a little spot on my ceiling right up there, and I've attached a string and slipped in a piece of welding rod. Now I have a little piece of rubber here. All it is just a piece of inner tube. I also leave a tailing line here in case I have problems. Now I'm going to put the rings in place. Hopefully I can get this to go down on there. There we go. Want to make sure that you get your chain tensioner where it should be, on the inside. Okay, I've got the head gasket set down on here, and now I'm going to set the cylinder head on. There we go. All right, the biggest thing is getting those dowels lined up on the head. And we are down. Feed timing chain back through. There we go. I'm going to feed the line through. So I'm going to... Okay, what I ended up doing is I took the rocker cover box off because it's easier to put sprocket in place. And I also brought, I rolled this over for top dead center on the left cylinder. And this is marked with a straight line and an L. And that's how you want to line up, because that goes across the top there when everything gets set up. So I'm going to put the rocker box back on, and then we can insert the cam. But it's much easier to do the sprocket, like I said, before you put the cover on. I got the line fed back through, and I'm holding up on the sprocket, and I'm walking this cover down in place there. One thing I just did is I installed these rocker box bolts in place, got everything kind of lined up, and I also put in the two 10mm style head bolts over here. So what we're going to end up doing is that we're going to work this cam through the rocker box, and we eventually want to end up with this in the upright position here. Got just enough room for the cam lobes, everything just kind of walk through there. There we go. And that all should slide together, what the manual said anyway. I think I'm a little bit off on, probably pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and put in this first bolt here on the cam. You have two bolts here, one with the shoulder and one without. So I'm going to put the full threaded one in first. Okay, I'm going to put a little red Loctite on this threaded one here. Okay, it's snug. So now I'm going to rotate the engine over, get this other bolt in, and we'll put a Loctite on it. So these should be torqued between 13 and 15 pounds. What I'm doing is I'm using one of my little quarter setups, and I'm going to have to rotate everything back over again to make sure that I've got everything in the right place. That little setup worked pretty good. Okay, I'm going to rotate this over to make sure that I've got everything lined back up again. All right, so I guess it's time to put some rockers in. Also be aware, if there were any shims, which I forgot to put back on the cam, you should put those back in place. Okay, I'm going to put in the left exhaust. I've already done the right hand side, but I thought I'd show you what I was doing here. Lubricate these up a little bit here, and then make sure you spread some on there. I've also put on new O-rings, because you should change those out, and that just slides together. On these, there's a line here, and there's a little divot on it. When you're putting the cam and covers and all that back together, you want to make sure that that divot is pointing out on either the rear or the front. Okay, I almost forgot to tell you that you have to rotate your cam down before you install these boxes. These should just slide on fairly easy. While you're doing that is that the cam lobes, you don't have the room unless you have these adjusted right. So, and you also want to lubricate where that rides on the cam and in the shell here. And as I said before, this should just slide right on there. And I want to make sure a little dents. You want them pointed one forward and one aft when you're doing this. So I think I'm going to find some Allen head screws and put in there, and then I'm going to rotate this over to make sure everything is good. But before I do that, right on these rocker arms where they get their oil, I think I'm going to put a little bit of lubricant there, and on the cam lobes. So when that rolls over, it'll get a good coating. What I'm doing here is I'm replacing those Phillip head screws with some Allen head style, and it's so much easier working on these when you do that. So I'm going to rotate, once I get this last one in, I'm going to rotate the engine over, and we'll put it back up and make sure that we are still in line where we should be, or as they say, in time. And am I at top dead? Oh yeah. Well, I didn't jump a tooth or anything. It looks good. Well, we might as well put the top cover on. Here's the first gasket. So it must go like that. And then we have another gasket. So this is old new stock that I got from another company I know. And that all just screws down on there. So the cap, oh, I see, it's kind of a cool little breather, so then it breathes out that. All right, so it's time to torque these. And there's a sequence in torquing these. So this is number 1, 2, 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and torque these to 10 foot-pounds. And then I'm going to come back and do them at 14 pounds. So it's just a crisscross pattern on these. So you're starting out with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Pretty simple. And I do it in 2 stages, sometimes in 3, but these will be torqued at 14 pounds. So now these are all torqued at 14 pounds. I'll let this sit overnight. The valves and everything still need to be set. What I'm waiting on some cover bolts for this side. Well, that's another thing too, is I got carburetor kits coming, so we can rebuild the carburetors, put the starter mechanisms and all that stuff in, and just kind of generally go over it. I still have to put the side gasket on for the stator cover and everything, and put that all together. There's several more episodes of this that we've got to do. Plus, we're going to be lacing wheels. We're going to be cutting up the frame a bit so we can make a cafe out of her. We've got a front end that we've got to kind of go through and bearings and stuff. So there's a lot to come up. It'll be a fun little I guess series on the CB350. This pretty much finishes up this episode on rebuilding the motor to this stage, what we have right now. There's, like I said, we have a few more things to do, setting up the points, doing the adjusting of the valves and the timing chain, also getting the carburetor rebuilt, also doing the starter. I'm hoping to do a bench start with this so we can kind of mess around with it, but we'll see how that works out. So if there's any questions or comments, you can put them in the comment section below, or you can send them to my email address at tmiyagi@hotmail.com. And if you've liked this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget that ringy-dingy button over there for the next episode coming up. So this is Mr. Miyagi saying, you be safe out there. Hope to see you on the road. Ciao.